In today's first interview, we're delving into a situation that's unfolding far from our doorsteps, yet hits close to the heart of anyone who values human dignity and the sanctity of life. The Gaza humanitarian emergency has escalated to a point where urgent international support is needed, and leading the charge among those offering a lifeline is the Humanitarian Coalition. Joining me today is Lauren Ravon from Oxfam Canada, a key figure in this coalition of hope, who brings with her a wealth of experience and a deep commitment to humanitarian aid. As the situation in Gaza continues to deteriorate, Lauren and her team are working tirelessly to provide essential services and support to those caught in the crossfire of conflict. In a time where the world feels more divided than ever, their work is a testament to what can be achieved when compassion and action come together. Lauren, welcome to What She Said.
Candace, thanks so much for having me on today.
So your work is more important than ever, and I'm really eager to hear how the Humanitarian Coalition and Oxfam Canada is making a difference in Gaza, and how our listeners can be a part of this critical mission. So can you start by telling us more about the Humanitarian Coalition and about Oxfam Canada? So sort of a two-parter here.
Fantastic. Well, first, I just want to say thank you for covering the humanitarian angle of this conflict. A lot of the commentary in the conflict is very loaded, very politicized, people taking different positions in different camps. And at the end of the day, what we have to remember is these are people that we're talking about, people and civilians, both in Israel and in Palestine, that are suffering today. And we really want to make sure that the attention stays on that and the importance of providing relief to civilians and building a path towards peace. So very happy to be on to discuss that today. Oxfam Canada is an international organization, part of the global Oxfam family, working in about 60 countries around the world. We do humanitarian work, long-term development work with communities and partners in countries around the world, and advocacy. And Oxfam Canada is one of the founding members of the Humanitarian Coalition that you referenced. The Humanitarian Coalition was formed to bring together some of the large humanitarian organizations in Canada to fundraise jointly when an emergency hits. So to say, in times of crisis, if you think of an earthquake, a tsunami, a conflict breaking out, it's much better if our organizations work together to draw attention to the problem with the Canadian public, to mobilize Canadians, to channel empathy in terms of donations to get humanitarian aid to the ground as fast as possible. And so in any large emergency, the Humanitarian Coalition members, our 12 member agencies, work together. And the situation that we're facing today in Gaza is no different than it would be in the past. Despite the very charged nature of the conflict, we work as we always do. We come together in a way that follows our humanitarian principles, impartiality, neutrality, focusing on civilians and populations first, and try to mobilize Canadians to be as generous as possible. And our experience with the Humanitarian Coalition is that precisely by working together, we're a coalition that brings together faith-based organizations, larger, smaller organizations with presence across Canada, presence in communities. By working together, we're able to get the word out, convey the complexities of any situation we're facing in simpler terms, and also very often work with the Canadian government to get more support to amplify Canadians' generosity. And so in this case, has been the case for several of our latest humanitarian appeals, the Government of Canada has agreed to match funds that Canadians, so individuals like you and me, give to the Humanitarian Coalition to provide a humanitarian response to this crisis. And so that means that up until November 12th, any dollar that a Canadian gives to the Humanitarian Coalition to respond to the emergency in Gaza will be matched by the Canadian government. So if you give $10, we will have $20 to respond to the response.
And I know you mentioned there's 12 members. I don't want you to mention them all. That could take a long time, but maybe you could just name a few of the members of the coalition so people are of an awareness of who is involved in this.
Of course. So as I mentioned, it's an interesting coalition because it has a diversity of actors who are all in the humanitarian space, but who, besides our different approaches or different mandates, are very coordinated in our humanitarian commitment. And so you can think of an organization like Oxfam, that's one of the founding members. In this case, we also have Islamic Relief, that's a faith-based organization that's responding. Organizations like Save the Children, focusing on children's rights. The Canadian Food Grains Bank, that's an expert and a leader in food security and food provision in emergency contexts. So different strengths. To give you more flavor of what that looks like, Oxfam is known globally in the humanitarian space for expertise in water and sanitation. So in any humanitarian response, Oxfam will be providing access to clean water, sanitation kits, hygiene kits for communities, rehabilitating destroyed whether it's water purification systems, drilling boreholes, providing, for example, safe latrines in refugee camps or displacement camps. And then other members of the coalition might be focusing more on food delivery, on medical assistance, on providing assistance to disabled people who have been hit by conflict or disasters. So by working together and fundraising together, we're making sure that we're covering all the bases of what's required in a humanitarian response.
You mentioned earlier that this is a really politically charged, atmosphere that we find ourselves in. And given the complex political landscape surrounding the Gaza humanitarian crisis, how does the coalition navigate these challenges to ensure aid reaches those in need without getting entangled in the conflict's politics? I feel like you must be constantly fighting against that pull into that.
So it is challenging, and it's not the first time that we've faced this sort of challenge as a coalition, in the sense that most emergencies have some political dimension. Even natural disasters are often caused by climate change that has political drivers. So to think that, any humanitarian emergency could be devoid of power plays in politics is probably naive. Obviously, in this circumstance, it's much more pronounced. But I think it's important to remind people that as humanitarian organizations, we have 4 guiding principles that unite all of the members of the coalition. And those are an adherence to putting forward humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. And so that means that in our response, we will provide aid to those in need, regardless of identity, race, religion. It means that we stay neutral, so we're not aligning with either faction in a crisis. Independence means that we're focusing on international humanitarian law. And so having these principles collectively helps guide our response. Now, that being said, abiding by these 4 principles doesn't mean that we do not look at the power dynamics at play in a conflict or in any crisis that is driving the problem, because that would not help us do our job and our humanitarian job well. And so in this case, and it's rather unique in humanitarian responses that we've been responding to, in this case, the nature of the conflict means that we can't even be responding at the moment. So an organization like Oxfam, we've been in Gaza for about 50 years. We have staff, many staff in Gaza. In other circumstances, we would be getting into gear immediately in terms of, as I mentioned, water, sanitation, protection services for civilians. Right now, we can't because our staff are literally running for their lives. We've had about 90% of our staff are now displaced from their homes, have fled their homes. A significant portion of them, their homes have been entirely destroyed. And so they're living with family members. They're literally on the run. And so in these circumstances, and I'm speaking about the Oxfam team, but it would be similar for other members of the Humanitarian Coalition. In these circumstances, we cannot be doing our job. We cannot be providing humanitarian assistance. And so not addressing what is making it impossible for us to respond at the full scale that's required would not be the humanitarian thing to do. And that's why an organization like Oxfam and many members of the Humanitarian Coalition have been actively calling for a ceasefire. And the reason for that is that the situation is so dire. It's catastrophic in Gaza. And if we don't have a ceasefire, we cannot be responding. We've seen in Gaza that the healthcare system has now in effect collapsed. I talked to you about Oxfam's focus on water and sanitation. The water system in Gaza is at near collapse. We're looking that the waste management systems and water treatment facilities are now all collapsed. So we cannot be responding to those issues, providing water, rehabilitating water access, if our staff are literally being bombed. And so in this case, I think it's important to convey the fact that a call for a ceasefire is not taking position with any side of the conflict. It's saying we are at risk if we want to do our work. And if we do not do our humanitarian work, people's lives are on the line.
Can we talk about the realities on the ground there? What does it look like for people in Gaza right now?
Course. So I just want to go back as well to how this conflict started and recognize the, close to 1,500 lives lost in Israel. Hostages are still being held in Gaza, Israeli hostages. So this is a crisis that has hurt people in Gaza and people in Israel. We're focusing on the humanitarian situation in Gaza in particular because Israel as a country has social safety nets, has hospital, has infrastructure to respond to the need of their people. The needs in Gaza right now are skyrocketing. We've seen that there's about 10,000 people that have been killed up to now in Gaza. The majority are women and children. About half are children who have been killed under bombings and shelling. There's probably over 12,000 injured. Many are still under the rubble. Perhaps most starkly, about 1.4 million people in Gaza have now been displaced. So these are people who have fled, left their homes either under the bombing or because of an evacuation call. And so people are, we've heard of families who are living 40, 50 people together because that's the only place they can find shelter. As I mentioned, the medical system has collapsed. So that means that if you're pregnant, if you're about to deliver a baby, if you have a child in the NICU, these hospitals no longer have power. And the hospitals are also at fear of being bombed. And so basic medical services are no longer available. And then, Gaza is a territory that has been occupied and so relies on outside aid for fuel, for food, for medical supplies. None of that is coming through right now. And so we're seeing a situation where acute hunger is escalating. And we see things like waterborne diseases. If you don't have access to clean water, things can escalate very fast, going from a very bad situation to a catastrophic situation. And so these are the areas that the Humanitarian Coalition wants to be intervening on in terms of food security, medical support, water and sanitation, access to clean drinking water.
This is so frustrating too, because you can't get in to help. I mean, it must be driving you crazy that you can't get in there to help these people. As I know, it is driving a lot of Canadians crazy that we can't do that. So what can we do? You mentioned that the government is offering a matching program. When people go to, say, the Humanitarian Coalition and they donate, do they choose what charity it goes to, or do you share that amongst everybody?
Yep. So on how we're distributing aid and responding on the ground, an organization like Oxfam has still some capacity, but is so much lower than if the situation was safe to operate. So for example, we've been doing cash distributions to targeted vulnerable families. We've been doing some food distribution and the distribution of hygiene kits for families. So there is some operations on the ground, but it's a drop in the bucket in terms of what we would be able to respond with if we didn't have this fear. And as I said, our staff literally fleeing for their lives and the fact that trucks with aid cannot get across the border. When a Canadian decides wants to give to the response, provide humanitarian support, they can either give to the Humanitarian Coalition centrally or to any of the member agencies. So for example, you can go to the Humanitarian Coalition website and make a donation. You can go to the Oxfam Canada website and make a donation. What we do is tally it all up, and that's how we work with the Government of Canada match to make sure that so we will tally up all the donations received, and up to $10 million, the Government of Canada will match it. So that's why we talk about a 2-for-1 donation. And this is in response to the Government of Canada recognizing the expertise of the Humanitarian Coalition and knowing that by providing the match, there's an incentive for Canadians to be even more generous. I don't want people to feel discouraged and to think, why would I give now if everything is on hold? All of our organizations are able to operate in some capacity. The importance of responding now is that by giving donations now, as soon as we're able to operate, we'll have the means to rush in and work with our community partners to be providing aid. And we know that responding to the disaster will take months, if not years, to rebuild, to get back to the level that was already a tragically difficult situation in Gaza. Even to get back to that level will take many months or years. And so every dollar that is donated will serve a purpose in Gaza in terms of responding to rebuilding water systems, rebuilding sanitation, rebuilding hospitals, rebuilding livelihoods and food infrastructure. So it's not in vain by any means. We are, and this is why the Canadian government gave the match now. It's to say, while it is on our collective minds, while it is in the media, we want to make sure that Canadians are hearing about it and providing those donations so that we're ready to go as soon as there's a ceasefire, as soon as the bombing and the shelling stops.
And beyond financial contributions, which some people may find difficult given the current economic situation going on globally, what else can people do?
Of course. So part of this is also getting the word out. I think that there's been so much media coverage around the situation that the humanitarian dimension of it is sometimes lost in the shuffle of the political commentary. And so even if you're not able to contribute, sharing the information of the Humanitarian Coalition, the call for donations, sharing information about the human stories behind this tragedy are very important. I would encourage your listeners to go follow our Instagram account, for example, where we have firsthand testimonies of my colleagues in Gaza. So the dozens of people who are there telling the stories of their families, of the realities that they're facing, a child's 9th birthday taking place under bombing. I think it's really important to have that human face and to understand that behind all the rhetoric and the kind of inflamed political language, these are people that we're talking about. These are children that might not be born. These are children that are not in school, that are running for their lives, that might be injured, elderly that might not be able to move and are being told to evacuate. So, following us, I think, on social media and then speaking about these stories, the human face of this tragedy is very important.
Well, that seems like an excellent place to end this interview. So could you share maybe some of the social channels then, or the website where people can go and find out more?
Of course. So you can visit the Humanitarian Coalition. As I said, this regroups all of our 12 organizations, and we're working together. So that's humanitariancoalition.ca. And as I said, any donation you make to the Humanitarian Coalition will be matched up until November 12th. You can also go to the Oxfam Canada website, so oxfam.ca. And again, if you choose to give directly to Oxfam, it is part of the Humanitarian Coalition's initiative, and the donation there will be matched. And I would in particular encourage you to go follow Oxfam Canada's Instagram feed, because that's where we have the most firsthand accounts of people that we work with and are in close communication with in Gaza, to hear their stories and to amplify their voices.
All right. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me and for the important work that you're doing. It's been a pleasure talking to you, but under terrible circumstances. So let's have you back again someday when you can share some successes in the area.
I would love that and really appreciate the time today. Thank you.